from the heart, stories honest and true, the one, the only, the human canvas you. Hello and welcome to The Human Canvas, the podcast where we explore our unique lived experiences, exploring the lives of people from all walks, diving into their unique journeys, their challenges, their passions, and the moments that have shaped who they are today. I'm your host, Nicholas Graham Hall, and today I'm honored to welcome to the podcast founder of How America Works, Anneliese Gryta. Anneliese Gryta, how did I do?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome. We did practice, everybody. We practiced a couple of times just to make sure. But I've known you. I was trying to think. We met in Perrysburg, Ohio. Did we meet before you came over to? I think I was having like a gathering at my place shortly before I sold it, I think.
Yeah, but I met you way back through, I think, philanthropy and your work with
With
your
Grant
charitable
Foundation. Yeah,
organization
with
way
Grant
back.
Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And the
Yep.
way back machine. Yes.
Hmm.
But it's sort of like, I think it started, I think what it got implanted, kind of the work that you're doing, part of what we'll talk about today with housing and government housing, affordable. We need a new term for what we call affordable housing. Because I'm like, there's a lot of people that are in housing, but it's not really affordable. I think when people hear affordable, they think Section 8. They think, I mean, there's
There's, yeah,
it gets collapsed, right? So,
right.
and what is quote affordable? Um, but I think at the time when you were working, was it the Toledo Housing Authority or no?
Yeah, I was. I think at that time I was working in that organization, which is technically a county organization. It's its own entity, but it covers Lucas County, Ohio.
Gotcha.
And typically communities across America, each mostly on at the county level, but sometimes there will be a county and a city housing authority. It sort of depends, and a lot of that is there's a lot of fascinating stories about why structures occurred the way they did,
Does
but
part
yeah.
of it have to do with just the critical mass of the size of the city versus the county and I don't know, funding? Probably
Yeah,
funding, dollars and cents probably gets
yeah.
involved, I imagine. But
Well,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
That's getting into the weeds pretty quickly. Before we get in the weeds, let's back up. So was the issue, the challenges of housing, was that is that something that was a continuation of sort of an expression for, personal passion or interest? Was it that specific, or would you say some of your passions and interests are maybe broader than that, and that's just been sort of one of the places where you've engaged that passion and interest, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would say that for me, I have always been curious about how do communities work when they work well? How do we create communities that really have quality, like public goods and services? Because I grew up in a community in the Buffalo, New York area that had like this tremendous wealth of like parks and museums and libraries and these very freely accessible places that, didn't take a lot of resources to get access to, but that kind of helped form, my creative, um,
Mm.
my life really. It really, growing up in a place like that that had this stockpile of these public assets, even though the broader community economically was challenged, I always have been really curious about that question. How do we do our best to create or recreate communities with strong public goods and services? So, getting involved in housing was something that was um, part of a much longer progression for me and me pulling on various threads throughout my career.
Yeah.
And I found myself there because it's so foundational, right? Like if kids don't grow up with stable housing, good luck trying to educate them. Good luck trying to help them, develop a strong career pathway. Happy to talk more about how I got there, but
Yeah, and so from what was the path from Buffalo to Toledo where you and I met?
yeah, that's a good story. I really started my career really in the arts. I did something that's a little bit backwards, where a lot of people have a more corporate career and then find their way to an artistic passion. I grew up in an artistic, creative musical family in the Buffalo, New York area and started teaching violin when I was getting through my college years. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I became really curious about why some kids that I was teaching who were growing up in schools that were not strong, poor neighborhoods. And then I had some kids that were like, it was in these elite private schools. And I was really interested to understand like why certain neighborhoods, like why certain kids were not going to get access to strong schools, strong, public goods. And so I found myself interested to go into the law, and I was like, okay, there's actually some policy background to this. There's some reasons why neighborhoods look the way they do. It's not just pure accident. It's not just always individual motivations. So I went to law school, and it was through my just looking across the country, I found my way to a law school that was based in Ohio and would afford me a lot of flexibility because it was an affordable school. I had the ability, I knew I would be able to do whatever if I wanted to go into public interest kind of work, I'd be able to.
Yeah.
So that is what happened after law school. I decided to go into a specific kind of law called public interest law in the legal aid field. And it was through a career fair focused on that, that was actually held in Washington, D.C., of all places, that brought me further into Ohio, into the Metro Toledo area for an AmeriCorps attorney job at a great organization called Legal Aid of Western Ohio / Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. And that's the story of
Yeah.
how I actually
My,
got to Toledo.
my old man was on the board for Able forever.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, because I grew up in Fremont
Mhm.
and in Fremont, not so much anymore, but when we were there, there was a lot of migrant workers there.
Yes.
Came up
Yes.
from right with the beet farms and with the sugar factory there. So they had a lot of needs
Yes.
for legal representation, right, and not having the resources,
Yeah,
obviously, to be able to afford that.
absolutely.
Oh, that's cool. So from that, did that then kind of evolve into the focus in the in working with the housing?
Still not quite
Not
yet.
yet, not
I
quite,
did
not
a
quite.
number of steps in between me getting to housing because I definitely have been a bit of a career nomad, but
Yeah,
in the nonprofit world and in the public and trust world in general, you find that because my first career opportunities were really fellowship funded, grant funded, time limited opportunities. So during my first sojourn at Able, I realized I could write some grants to create a project that would be focused on really community development work. Really, if you're looking at supporting low income people, what came to mind for me was how do we support entrepreneurship in this community? How do we make sure that folks there have access to legal advice, capital? There's certainly a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and interest all across, in every income bracket in this country, but folks who are lower income may, find their way to they are in a way more in need of legal advice or how to structure a business entity or how to protect themselves.
yeah,
And so I started, I wrote some grants. I extended my time at Able by creating a legal clinic and working on actual access to capital because the interesting thing I found during that time was, realizing that other cities in Ohio and around the country were actually accessing public streams of funding through the federal government that Toledo was not. There were actual different pools of money that were going through community development financial institutions. And because our institutions like weren't as big or maybe weren't as strong, we were actually leaving money out of our community that we're paying taxes into. And so we should have the benefit of those dollars that were to do things like support really, really tiny microfinance, and in the
Yeah.
US, that's like, smaller loans of maybe $25,000, $50,000. But the amount of money that banks traditionally will, it's too small for them to get involved in lending. So we, you
Or
know,
an entrepreneur that wants to start a expand a service business or
Mhm.
a food truck or I mean just there's so
Yes.
many different there's so many micro businesses and if they don't know what they're doing, they can get capital but at terrible rates and all sorts.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of brought me into a different world, which is sort of the civic leadership space and the economic development community and the kind of people who are working in, government, small business technical assistance centers, the Chamber of Commerce, a regional economic development organization that were interested to go, oh, there's somebody who's out here who's also concerned about our community's lack of these resources. And so, we created a project. We worked on partnering with a Columbus-based organization to get some of those resources here. Instead of creating a new nonprofit, we were like, how do we partner with an existing strong nonprofit that has an interest in expanding throughout the state? And
Mm.
that was an important thing for me because it brought me into a conversation with the larger, philanthropic community and organizations like the Community Foundation, which I don't think I had learned about what a community foundation was until I got into that microfinance and micro entrepreneurship work. So
Gotcha.
that was what then brought me an opportunity to go work for the Community Foundation in the role of, I ultimately became the vice president of grant making and strategic initiatives there, which I just am passionate about still community foundations, even though I don't work at one. I think they're really fascinating organizations that have a very important role to play in every community across this country because they are the crossroads of where, like business and community leadership and nonprofits and government can be at the table together to work on tackling community issues.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Still not to housing yet, but almost
I
there.
know I'm patient. We're getting there. No.
Yeah. So during those years, I spent almost 7 years in that role at the Community Foundation. And our job really was to act as, I always explain community foundations, they're a little bit kind of like umbrella organizations for many smaller foundations in a way underneath them. And we provide, instead of if someone wants to, has some wealth that they want to, endow a fund with after they pass away or even while they're alive, they can create a fund at a community foundation. And then there will be, permanent dedicated staff there that will steward those resources and help make, grants out of those resources, which, largely come from, business success, and I always like to point that out that, many people who have businesses are looking to ensure that there's a strong community, left behind. So community foundations' jobs are to act as these advisors, and also like perpetual caretakers of these resources. So we're always having to stay up on, what are the issues in the community right now? Like what's going on with education? What's going on with public health? What's going on with even arts and culture or, neighborhood development issues? And so it was during that, in that role that I became so aware that the Metro Toledo area, especially around when we were looking at youth issues and like how do we ensure that, kids are growing up with access to what they need.
Mm.
Toledo at the time had a very high youth poverty rate and a very high youth homelessness rate, as was measured by a specific part of the federal government that focuses on education. Like there's a tremendous number of kids in the Toledo public school system that were homeless or living in less than ideal home situations, like doubled up with family members living in cars, going in and out of shelters. And we were like, if we as a community foundation want to impact education, well, we better get a handle on understanding like what are the levers that could improve housing conditions in a community. And that is what brought me, face to face with really, like deeply getting to know that field, and what's going on in housing? Why is it failing? When it works well through our public investments, like what are the things that really create some positive change? So yeah, I kind of came at it from that space first.
Got it. Is that when you made the move from the community foundation to the housing?
Yeah, it was through that time that I was really trying to understand, like what communities have done well with their homelessness systems, because the homelessness system itself is its own like unique island in the broader space of publicly funded housing resources. And it in our community at the time, like was not regarded as a strong homelessness system. And so I was researching and learning, and then the broader community actually, some of the governmental leaders who were focused on social services and mental health actually invited a speaker from the Milwaukee area because they had done some really dramatic improvements to their homelessness infrastructure, especially around impacting chronic homelessness. And I don't think they had reached this point yet, but they were on a trajectory to actually reduce chronic homelessness by 92% in their community. And
And
so I
what-
became fascinated with that story, really studied it, really got to know the Milwaukee folks about like the inner workings of like why and how they did it. Like how did they move money? How did they change how existing money worked? How did they adopt a model that was proven and had some evidence behind it? And I actually studied it and became so interested in it. I gave a TEDx talk in our local community that explored like how a community, can transform the way they use existing public resources to create a dramatic change. And it was through that talk that I got to know the then leader of the housing authority at the time, who was like, wow, we're seeing an opportunity to really get involved with our community's homelessness system, which, the housing authority is its own separate, publicly funded housing. In some places, it kind of can operate like a silo, but they were getting involved with the actual homelessness continuum of care system and how to help improve that with a broad array of community leaders. So there was an opportunity for me to kind of step into a role that was around helping to, convene a conversation and also the mechanics of how would we do this? How would we replicate something like
and
Milwaukee?
what year, just to help give our
Yeah,
listeners
that
like
was
a time frame. What year are we talking? What years are we
that
talking?
was around, I want to say 2018, 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you, I'm sure people can just, do a search, but can you summarize kind of what the, what Milwaukee, I guess, what their breakthrough was, if
Sure.
anything in particular?
Yeah. The story, and it's actually one that I have a video about that folks can go and find at
We'll have all the,
America.
we'll have all the hyperlinks in the, yeah, we'll add that
Great.
to our discussion. Yes, for sure.
To sum it up, they basically took all of their existing housing resources. Now, when I say housing resources, federal government has in some communities up to 9 different grants that they are sending in to most metro areas. Some of the metros, it's 7 or 8, but HUD is a massive, complicated federal agency, and So what that means is that, some of those resources were starting to be sent into communities in the 1930s, like 1930s, 40s, New Deal, kind of social programs. That is things like the public housing infrastructure. Then, in the 70s and 80s, you have the Section 8 program, but that's still all just one part of HUD. Then you have things like the homelessness continuum of care, and that money comes through another department of HUD, and it is, was set up in the 1990s, so you have almost these like sedimentary layers of different federal funding streams that start pumping into communities, and they can operate in harmonious ways where those resources, you can transform them, you can stack them, you can create partnerships and alignment where you use the money in a way to implement an evidence-based approach to addressing chronic homelessness, which in this community, and in many places, that model looks like housing first. But to be able to do that, like really, it's interesting. Communities can have the same resources coming into them. They can use those dollars in ways that are completely siloed, completely almost anachronistic, like operating in ways that are just kind of holding people in a pattern, holding people in poverty, or they can operate the same resources in ways that are totally transformative. And, most people in the public don't ever see how or don't
Right.
know enough about these resources to even be able to demand that the local leaders change.
Do something, yeah. Like they don't even I can just imagine, it's like you're continuing to use a Band-Aid to try and address a gash that the Band-Aid is never going to care for what is actually needed. It's not. And so
Yeah.
how did
So how,
what's the source of the gash?
yeah.
What, and um, yeah, it's sort of like to me, I think of it, it's like not having housing is the outcome. That's the result of what? And so just building a house doesn't solve for, that's like, well, the problem showed up, but if we're not solving for what led to that problem, that issue, it's not going to transform. We're so short, we have such a short, we're not thinking generations in this country. We're not thinking many generations. We're not thinking hundreds, thousands of years. It's like we're thinking who's in charge now? Who's the next administration? What's the
Yeah.
so we're so short term. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I'll be happy to be wrong. But it seems like that's part of the challenge that we don't have. And so it's like, oh nope, someone's got a new administration, new solution, new idea.
Mhm.
And it was like, what? We didn't even get a chance to screw up we didn't learn any lessons from what we did before because we weren't able to see it through. So
Exactly.
oh, 1 second. I'll be right back. Thank you. I said I don't tell everybody we don't edit here, so we won't edit. People will know that I just had UPS show up my door. Which, hey, that's today's that's today's modern life here. We always have people showing up at our door. Um, so I'm curious that sort of insight, and you had the TED Talk, and then the opportunity. So then you got a job to actually be able to begin to kind of bring some of these insights potentially to bear. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I spent time in Toledo helping to kind of, I was sort of in a way, like the project manager to spark a transformation at the local homelessness agency. But I was doing that from an unusual seat. I was sitting at the housing authority. But it was during that time that I also was I was simply learning. I'm someone who loves to devour information and research and stories about really what's working around the country. So I was learning a lot about other housing authorities. And I learned about the King County Housing Authority, which was out in Seattle, Washington, the county surrounding Seattle.
Yeah.
And that housing authority has done some really tremendous work that has been studied and is evidence based. They created something called the Creating Moves to Opportunity program, which was about how they could use existing Section 8 dollars, which for folks, if it's helpful to have a little primer, the monies that come to a housing authority are principally the public housing dollars, the traditional public housing that you think of, and then Section 8, which is a voucher people take to private market landlords. The Seattle Metro is a huge area. And so they thought, well, you can take those vouchers to any neighborhood. You can take them to a neighborhood that might not be rich in assets and public goods and services, but you could take it to a neighborhood that is. And they had figured out how to set a lot of the inner kind of workings of how do you say what that voucher is worth. They figured out how to really make it so that you could take that voucher to higher quality like neighborhoods that have good schools, and you're not buying a mansion with it, but you can at least afford the rent to get into a more basic unit in a higher quality school district. So they created a pilot that had been studied by Harvard, and like how could you educate families so that they could learn how to take that voucher to a neighborhood. And they figured out that with very little additional investment, just some kind of coaching of the families, they could get a lot of folks would just simply choose to live in neighborhoods where maybe they could get access to better jobs, better schools, better public transit. So I had sort of looked at them as a real kind of a guide star to, like, wow, North Star, this is a great organization. And I just randomly had a recruiter with an opportunity in my inbox that was based at the King County Housing Authority. I thought, what the heck, I will just apply. And ultimately I did secure a role there, actually running their federally funded housing programs. And it was a real incredible opportunity. And so I moved out to Seattle to go take that role on a couple of years ago.
And so with the role in Toledo and then in Seattle, I guess I'm curious, there's what you devoured, what you studied, the research, the reports, all that. And then there's like being on the front line,
Hmm.
being in the thick of it, right? Being in it versus observing it.
Yeah,
So what were some of the surprises, insights that you experienced while kind of being in it versus the theory?
absolutely. I think the biggest surprises for me, there were many, but one of them is that I'd spent most of my early life growing up in cities that have struggled economically, considered part of the Great Lakes, Rust Belt, communities that had an economic peak many decades ago and now are struggling with how do we change the trajectory of a decline? And the sort of social challenges that come along with that seems so difficult and seems so like, well, how do we need more jobs in this community. That's going to be our solution. But how do we do that? And so you feel like the problem set is really big, but you can move across the country and live in what's considered a growing economy, a very strong market city with increasing jobs, population growth, all a tremendous wealth of success, and resources, and you can have even bigger social challenges and problems. And so it is not the sort of economic strength of a community overall that dictates whether children are growing up in neighborhoods with strong public goods and services and schools and assets. It's a much more complicated, layered problem to get into about how you would support um, that initiative. So that was number one. But I think number two, the reality was it was also just during the pandemic that I made this move, and the challenges in Washington State are tremendous. There were a lot of different challenges related to public safety, to the state of affairs around, just this, like, I got there at the time when, the state's drug possession law had been rendered unconstitutional in their state constitution. So I had some very real operational challenges where we're operating, 3,000 units of public housing, and the property managers there are really like faced with, what does it mean when you don't have enough police, or you have somebody maybe doing drugs in your parking lot, or there's no resource to send them to. There's no even responsive community officer that can show up, because there's actually no law for them to enforce or action that they can be empowered to take. And there are a lot, certainly, like, important reasons for why that law had been rendered unconstitutional, and I don't want to diminish that, but the reality
Yeah.
is it's just like operating challenges are just, you know, tremendous in an environment like that. And so I had to spend quite a lot of time on, like, the basics of, does our staff have what they need? Do the residents have what they need? How are we going to deal with the fact that we actually have this heartbreaking reality of homelessness in our public housing? Like, we have a homeless encampment right next door to our public housing, and you have folks who are wanting to, like, live a calm, safe life and raise their children there. But, there is the reality of a homelessness encampment where there are people doing drugs right next door to the kids' park, playground. And that is, I mean, that is something that, like, shouldn't exist in America, in my opinion, but it is. And
Yeah.
like, that is a complicated set of failures that we are going to have to spend some time undoing.
So with those experiences, and I know that we're gonna again share, you've been creating some different videos to try and educate and illuminate and create some awareness so that we citizens of this country can transform perhaps from being consumers to actually being citizens. Because I think that there's like a feeling of, well, what the heck can I do about it?
Mhm.
What difference? Like, what I don't even like. I'd have no. Yeah, okay. There's organizations that are there's local nonprofits that are
Mhm.
providing services to homeless or people in poverty. I know I can go and volunteer. I volunteer at a pantry, so yeah, I know I can do that. But in terms of being able to help impact change, being able to make a difference in a more systemic way. I guess, what are you finding or seeing, or what are the opportunities for us as an individual citizen?
That's a great question, because we all know the obvious ones, right? Like, we all know about volunteering. Some of us may know about, sitting on the board, as you mentioned that your dad had done. There are so many of these opportunities, but at some level they are not satisfying, right? Like, you can have that individual assistance, or you can support one organization, but you can look at it and go, wait, homelessness is still enormous in this community. Like, you could be sitting on a board of a nonprofit in Seattle and go, great, I'm glad, I know I'm doing good work, but why are there still 16,000 homeless people? Like,
Yeah.
that is frustrating. And then I think for folks that are not, already engaged at some level, like, it's just a total, like, everybody is just very jaded about government. They just have had it up to their eyeballs
Yeah.
in what is going on. And have I have found my own life taking me on a path towards, like, I need to educate. I need to help people understand what we have built in this country, because you can look at one housing authority in one community and go, that is not a well-run organization. People are staying in poverty. And then you can look at another housing authority and go, that's an excellent organization, that they are knocking it out of the park. People are transforming their lives here. And you don't know the difference if you don't have a level of education and even like what is a housing authority. And the scary reality is that we have a kind of a constitutional structure in this country that allows us to do things very differently in different communities, but that creates a huge amount of complexity. And what it
Mhm.
means is that for the average everyday citizen who, has, 10 minutes a day to read the news or devote themselves to understanding their civic, what's going on in like the country, let alone where do they live, it's almost impossible to interpret what is going on, and then it's even harder to form an idea about what solutions you should get behind. Like, for example, I find that there are a lot of folks in the Seattle area that are very, and I want to just preface this by saying I no longer work in the Seattle
Yeah.
area. I no longer work for any organizations there, and I really left because of this passion, like because I feel so compelled to teach and tell the stories and to educate
Yeah.
the citizens of this country about what is government. But I feel that you can find that people will get very swayed by certain ideas and they will go, I see that there's homelessness. I see that there's some politicians talking about this is the solution, this is the solution. And it's oftentimes I find that the solutions that are offered are still far away from what I would think is really going to make a difference as having been a practitioner on the inside. But those solutions can help, like, can whip up a lot of political, like, it can whip up a base. It can
Right.
help that politician get to power. It can, captivate imaginations of people who don't have like the amount of time, which very understandably, to like totally digest what's going on in their civic landscape and say, wait a second, maybe that's not the right solution. So, I find that it's man,
It's
for
it's easy to talk about, yeah, we're going to do these few things and that's
yeah,
going to fix the problem. And if you really understand the inner workings, you can be like, yeah, there's no way that's not going to happen. That's just
yeah,
that person doesn't actually understand the complexity of the current system
right.
to be able to actually make that change
Yeah.
happen.
Because especially when you look at a place like Seattle, which I have a video that may be on my channel by the time this podcast is out that really compares places like Seattle to Houston, Texas, because there's been a similar population boom over the last 20 years. And Seattle has a staggeringly larger homelessness and housing crisis than Houston does. And you will find a lot of people demanding more funding for things like housing. And I don't deny that we need funding. I mean, there's certain subcomponent, like sort of subpopulations. Like we have a completely insufficient mental health care system in this country that has been structurally dismantled over decades. So that's
Yeah.
like a very specific thing we need a lot more funding for. But if we don't also address the fact that the market is unable to respond to the population boom, like home builders cannot build enough homes. We cannot add enough multifamily housing in the Seattle metro to keep up with the population boom for a variety of different real, like in the weeds laws that exist, or just the reality of zoning and permitting and those things, which in a community that has, in that particular place in just King County, there's 39 individual cities that are also throwing down barriers to home construction. And then you also have state level laws that are restricting. You're like, if people only clamor for, we need more money, and we never go, well, what about the regulations that are also
Yeah.
preventing the
I was
market?
in the, I was in the money world. Money is not the solution.
Yeah,
It's just never, there's never enough of it. Nobody ever has enough of it. Um, and it's a completely fabricated system, people. You know, we made it up. We're always doing funny things with it. Um,
Yep.
okay, so I have like so I think I have a guess why, but like I throw a for example. We have here in Bloomington, not too far from me, there's an area where we built a new hospital out on one side of town. It's newer, it's more modern, dot dot dot. So we had so the hospital, it's kind of in town. It's very close, frankly, to where a lot of the support services are
Mhm.
for the unhoused. And um, they tore it down. They left the parking garage,
Mhm.
but they tore the hospital down, and and now they're gonna build some new housing, and there's going to be some commitment, certain percentage of quote affordable, but it never ends up being as much as they say. They never end up building as much as they say they're going to because market demands, et cetera, et cetera. And there've been more than a few people like myself going, you've got this hospital that had all these rooms, had all this infrastructure. I mean, this it took something to tear it down because it was built like in the 40s and 50s, back when we actually use real materials like, stone and like and people are like, why don't they just convert the hospital and do some retrofitting? There's just all that
Mhm.
housing there. And I'm thinking it's probably because it wouldn't be up to code and there just would be it just would, it'd be too hard from a code perspective is my is just our is our hunch. Those that like myself, armchair quarterbacks that don't really understand weren't there,
Yeah.
didn't even weren't there to know whether or not that was even up for consideration, right? But we do have in these, especially in this, like in the Rust Belt, downtown Toledo, there's a lot of empty buildings,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Lots. Um, so I don't like, is it just too complex to transform empty structures into, to make it livable, to make it into housing?
That's a great question. And it's one that brings me into the, another sort of element of housing in America in terms of when I say housing, like non-market based housing, meaning somebody's getting money from a government somewhere to help support either the build or the retrofit or the then
Yeah.
permanent subsidy of a unit because affordable is a lot of it. Like that is a enormous sort of sub industry connected to housing. And it's a very sophisticated industry because it is very much so driven by, for-profit developers,
Right.
banks and investors, because it stems from a choice in how, like in this
I
country.
mean, I
Oh, go
mean,
ahead.
no, I mean, like your point, developers are there for a very short period of time. They have an exit in and an exit out. They're not there. That's not part of their model. The thing is, I'm not interested in saying I think everybody's playing their game
Mhm.
and
Well,
they're playing,
housing, yeah,
yeah,
and if I could say the way the financing happens for these kinds of things, because is connected to something that is even more arcane than a housing authority or a, homelessness continuum of care. It has to do really with a regime connected to what's called the low income housing tax credit world, which is that's what I say. That it stems from a choice that in this country, I mean, many, many decades ago, we decided, policymakers, housing industry experts, kind of got together and go, like, well, what's a great way we could support the creation of affordable units? And they're like, well, they cooked up a policy regime that is called the low income housing tax credit. And it's through the IRS regulations, and it enables, capital to move towards affordable housing under a very strict set of rules to support the creation of affordable housing. And like the number of like, I mean, it came out of banking. It came out of, people who are connected to investment. Some of the first affordable housing, what we call LIHTC, that's the acronym for those deals, were investors like Warren Buffett were involved in them. It was very sophisticated. And that's where, when you look at housing, you're like, how can the average everyday person who sees homelessness in their neighborhood and wonders what is going on here? Why don't we have enough units to support these people? Will never, I mean, like, when does that word, low income housing tax credit, make it into the collective consciousness? Almost never. And
Right.
it is extraordinarily arcane. And the people who are involved in doing it, like they exist in a world of like hyper specialization. Even within the housing authority world, some housing authorities do build housing this way. But even like I find that the staff people at the housing authority who are involved in that kind of development work are sort of treated as hyper specialist experts who have an arcane body of magical knowledge that most people can't understand because it's so complicated. So there's even a division within the professional world of like government housing people. And so it is places like Toledo. I remember 20 years ago, 15 years ago working here, and there was just like we didn't have enough like sophisticated folks who knew about that kind of development to help even bring that capital to a community like this. And so that capital can help support like deeply subsidized units, affordable units, and how that works is very, I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but if even at the community level, if you don't have like the sophisticated understanding of how those tax credit programs work, you end up even in a worse spot, when it comes to and so that is, I find
So,
that itself to be a problem that we've built things that are so arcane and so distant from the American public that we cannot actually exercise our role as citizens, which is to be deeply influential on how our government is governing us. And it creates like this
so it's,
real signal to noise, kind of problem.
I mean, so it sounds like it's fair to say that we have um, some some models that are just they're just around because they've been around,
Hmm.
and there's and people know how they work, and so they're working within that particular model, but it's kind of it's keeping things the way that they are.
Definitely.
So it's
Definitely.
limiting, it's preventing the ability. You might want to think about it differently and you might want to approach it differently, but to do that with the current kind of rules and regulations, it's challenging, if not impossible, perhaps. I don't know.
Yes, I would say that's a pretty accurate assessment because every and that people might be surprised to hear a person like me say this, but government creates a lot of regulation and government itself can create so many rules and regulations that we are paralyzed from doing something differently. Or, I think that the story of Milwaukee's success is it's important for people to understand because while they were able to achieve such an important like accomplishment, they did it through, I mean, they had to kind of twist themselves into pretzels to make it happen. They really, yeah,
Friend asked me, like, what do you think the solution is for homelessness? And I just said, it's the will. Like, we
yeah,
just have to collectively say, this is, it's just unacceptable. Like, the cost to our community is too great. It's not just the cost to them, it's like the cost, like, we all pay, we all suffer. And because the, that a person being unhoused, that's what you see.
right.
But that's not like the total, that is not the total impact of that situation. It's
Yeah.
much greater than that. And we just, have not decided that enough like enough is enough. We just have
Mhm.
to, we have to, we have to, it's just the cost is too significant for all of us as citizens of this city, county, state, country, etc. I'm like, it's not money. It is not money. No, it's not money. It's just will.
Mhm.
Will takes time. Will takes energy. Will takes attention. Will takes focus way beyond the here and in a few weeks, a few months, a few years out. It would take real, that's my hunch anyway.
Well, I do think it requires that, and it requires people being at the citizen level more sophisticated in how they demand it.
Mm.
Because what I have found is there can be a lot of stopping points, like people who kill progress, they're hidden everywhere. They are not just the enemies in what we may think of as the federal level. Like there are people who are local who
Mm.
go, oh, I run this organization, this entity that controls maybe millions of dollars a year that could potentially, if we decided to use it differently, we could accomplish something like Milwaukee did. But we're not going to because we want to do things our way. And so you find these blockers, they're hidden. They're hidden everywhere. And sometimes it's because they want to control their fiefdom. Sometimes it's because they want to own the success of something because it's how they stay in political, like how they achieve power. And I think that's what's so difficult about America is, we have, I would say, like as much as, I mean, when you think of how many units of government exist, I mean, if you ever look up, we have to have a census in the United States to count how many units of state and local government we have. And the amount of just stasis that gets created when in a community you have maybe 6 or 7 siloed large pots of money that could go to support something like doing what Milwaukee did, but you have people who are controlling those pots of money that won't
Yeah.
change how they operate. And so when you say demand change, we're like, how do we demand change?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
So I'm aware of, you know, holding a sign up
yeah.
street. I'm aware of calling, sending emails to your local,
Hmm.
is that like, is that, or is there more? Is there different? Is there more strategic? Is there, what are, are you seeing any examples of how citizens are making a material difference?
Oh, that's a great question. And what I'll say is that citizens first have to learn. Like citizens that want to make a difference, I actually find that it's some of the people that are um, like kind of taking the time to really educate themselves about what is their civic eco. I call it the civic ecosystem. Like who are all the players? What are all the organizations? And then learning about the civic wallet. Like what is all the money that comes into this community? Like how is it being used? And
Hmm.
I find that the people who are like spending time to learn about those things are usually closer to finding the right ways to influence change. And it's some of it's very old school stuff. It's like, I get very interested in like, well, what's the next generation's version of like the local Rotary luncheon or how do you make an organization like a community foundation where people are showing up in a meeting and getting the download of what's going on in the current state of affairs on the community's homelessness system? Like, how do you make that information like broadly available
And
to
it's
the
so
local
much, it's
community?
so much more difficult with the dismantling of local newspapers, I mean, we just
I
like
know.
we don't have not that that's like that's I think there's more if someone's really to really understand it's way beyond that, but that at least is would bring you some awareness, right? It'd
I
be
know.
part
Yeah,
of
and
yeah.
my dad was actually a journalist at a local newspaper, and so I've seen the kind of hollowing out of
Yeah.
local journalism, especially the folks that were doing, like the people who would show up at the city council meetings and really
Right.
track what was going on. But even so, I feel like there's almost something more fundamental that we're missing as a society, and that's like a certain kind of sort of honest broker for information that goes beyond local news. Like, how do you know what is really going on in a way that is trustworthy? And
Mhm.
I think at this point, because we have tools available, like all of the new media that exists in the world of, kind of even YouTube and TikTok, and like people are getting their information from these places, I just go, is there a better way to equip people with the questions to ask or the research threads to pull on so that they don't just take something someone says at face value and they learn how to equip themselves to be a more educated civic actor? And some of that, yeah, maybe showing up at the local, local meetings, but I think we're going to need a bigger transformation if we want to keep operating American government the way that we do, which is decentralized, lots of local control and power, lots of silos, quite frankly. Like, if we're going to move all those silos, a whole lot more people have to know what
Mm.
you would need to do to move them, you
Yeah.
know, and that's going to
And I
be
think
the challenge.
is that what you're at least trying to begin to do with the videos that you're creating?
Exactly. Yeah. My whole next
Yeah.
career step has been to start this new initiative
Can
called
you, yeah, can you
yeah.
share, yeah, can you share more
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that?
It's called How America Works, and it is an organization focused on education, media, and really teaching people how to interpret, like build their own factual understanding. Like, I'm the storyteller. I'm giving people a framework. I'm giving people some threads to pull on to go, oh, this is a housing authority. This is what literally the low-income housing, finance world is. So then how can I then take that knowledge in my community and find the people who know about those systems, and I can get information about how they really are working. Are they strong? Are they not? And then also understand scale of challenges, because you can have when you talk even about Milwaukee's success, we were talking about specifically chronic homelessness, like the folks that are on the street, that there's a specific HUD definition of that, but that's not actually even looking at the broader issue of housing instability. So, like, even cluing people in about those foundational, it's almost like a taxonomy, like of public goods and services. Like, what is that thing? Because that thing will be called different names in different communities.
Yeah.
So that makes it even more challenging. But that's my hope, is that through what is the right now the YouTube channel, How America Works official, folks can engage with content that like gives them the ability to use their own civic landscape as their really like their canvas for change, and being able to do that with other people who are also in like demanding a change. And so it's not going to be a quick solution. Nothing is the silver bullet. And usually what local politicians are saying, like, I don't care who they are, what political party, we need to question what they're saying all the time, basically, and then form our path as interested, motivated groups of citizens from our own study of the terrain.
Do you have sort of what do you have a story of a someone, and it could be a you one, but someone that sort of did sort of take that time to educate, learn, understand, and then how they made with that, how did they make a difference? Is there anyone that comes to mind?
Oh gosh, I've been so focused on the sort of couple stories I've been connected to
Yeah.
that, I think what really though, it comes out of groups working together. It still comes back to, if we're in the United States of America, where we're all free to like form associations, form interest groups, form nonprofits, when folks come together in a way that bridges the gap across different, divides. Like, I still come back to places like community foundations as being a crossroads. They may involve, like the Milwaukee story was really helped by having a downtown business development organization that represented all the downtown businesses that were like yeah, we want to support this. Like we care about this issue because not only it's the right thing to do, but it also is good for our businesses if we have a downtown that doesn't have, very clear evidence of like suffering and chaos and crisis all amongst us. People will come downtown to go see a baseball game if they feel safe. It's really when we do engage in something that is actually less individualistic and more about transforming with a broader coalition that I think is the most where the biggest successes come from. Because then you also create political, pressures on local electeds. You create like uncommon allyship. Like you create a lot of really good energy that is just beyond what we can do as individuals. That's the thing in our society that is so hard. Like, how do we be individuals together? And how
Yeah,
do we
right.
do this thing that is in our common
Yeah.
interest?
It's
It's
almost like in being able to come together, uh, like come together enough, but be also loose enough that you don't just create another silo,
yeah.
you don't, yeah, just create another thing. Um, I like to, before we wrap up our conversation, I always, excuse me, like to ask if there's anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you'd like to talk about, or any question any really good question that I didn't ask that if had I asked, it would have been able to, give you an opportunity to talk about something that you'd like to talk about.
Well, thanks for that opportunity. I'm thinking about it because we covered certainly a lot of ground, and in any of these little vignettes we've talked about, that we could go for probably an hour on any one of them. But um, what I think is just a question I think I'll put to your viewers to think
Right,
about is
right.
where do they have opportunity to come together with other people around changes that matter to them? Like where can they enter a space that is actually full of curiosity and where they can set aside their preconceptions about what needs to change and just
Mm,
create a space to ask questions and learn together. So for
mm,
folks that are listening who are interested to do that, I would,
yeah.
I'd really encourage it.
That's awesome. Anneliese Gryta. How did I do? Did I
Did
remember?
great. Annalisa is how we say it. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like the Mona Lisa, you told me. That
Yep.
sounds like it's like, you know, um, what I think is beautiful is that I mean, a lot of things that you shared is really beautiful, but your what had your experience of teaching young people the violin and like and seeing the difference of in access, and that can really transform a person's life, and they don't and at that age they're not there, they don't have a vote, they are where they are, and being able to um I don't know, you just continue to kind of, I see that you've continued to follow that curiosity and that question. So it'll be really interesting. Should our paths cross in another 10 years or 20 years, or it's going to be really interesting to see how that passion and curiosity and interest that you have continues to unfold. I'm sure it'll be exciting. So exciting to
Well,
witness the continued unfolding of that curiosity. And anyhow, just really appreciate you sharing your lived experience with all of our listeners today.
well, thank you so much for having me, Nick. It was a real pleasure to be here, and I look forward to listening to your upcoming episodes too, and seeing where the human canvas takes you.
Thanks.
Stories from the heart, stories honest and true. The one